Shaq was about to step out for a quiet dinner until a woman blocked his car and sneered, "This entrance is for actual guests." The crowd went still. People stared. Cameras came out. Shaq didn't argue. He just smiled, because he had a plan. What happened next ruined her reputation, turned the whole restaurant upside down, and changed one man's life forever. Stay till the end, because this story, it's one for the history books. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The sleek black SUV glided into the valet lane of Le Jardin, the most exclusive fine dining restaurant in the city. The golden lights of the entrance reflected off the polished hood as Shaquille O'Neal eased the car to a stop. He had barely put it in park when a sharply dressed woman in a pearl-white blazer stepped in front of his car, blocking his way. Shaq frowned and rolled down his window. Before he could speak, the woman's face twisted into a look of immediate disapproval. "Sorry, but this valet is for guests only," she said coolly, her hands resting on her hips. Shaq blinked. He glanced past her at the wide-open valet spots. There was plenty of room. Other luxury cars were neatly lined up, their owners stepping out, greeted with warm smiles from the valet staff. But this woman, she wasn't moving. He arched a brow. "That's great because I'm a guest." Her lips curled into a smirk. "I don't think so. This is a private establishment. I don't think you belong here." The words hung in the air like a bad stench. The slight emphasis on you wasn't lost on Shaq. He let out a slow breath, gripping the steering wheel. He had been through this before, people assuming things about him just because of how he looked or dressed. Tonight, he had kept it simple. A fitted hoodie, comfortable sneakers, and dark jeans. Not the look of someone she thought deserved a spot here. The woman tapped the hood of his car lightly, her smirk never fading. "Maybe you should try somewhere. More your style." Shaq took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He was here for a good meal, not an argument. "Ma'am, do you know who I am?" She barely suppressed a laugh, tilting her head. "Oh, so you're one of those. Some influencer? A rapper?" Shaq's face remained unreadable. "Nope." "Well, it doesn't matter." She waved him off. "Because you're not parking here." Shaq stared at her for a long moment, then let out a deep chuckle. "Lady, you have no idea what you just did." The tension crackled in the air like static electricity. Shaq stared at the woman, his patience thinning, while she stood firm, arms crossed, blocking his car like a human barricade. The absurdity of the situation would have been funny if it weren't so irritating. Before Shaq could say another word, a nervous voice cut through the standoff. "Ma'am, please, he's allowed to park here." A young valet attendant, Miguel, rushed forward, his hands gesturing anxiously between the woman and Shaq's car. His neatly pressed uniform was slightly wrinkled from rushing between luxury vehicles all evening. This wasn't the first entitled customer he had to deal with, but this was definitely the worst. The woman barely glanced at Miguel, waving him off like a pesky fly. "I know the kind of people who try to sneak into places like this," she said, voice dripping with condescension. Shaq let out a deep, amused chuckle, shaking his head. "Sneak in?" He folded his arms over his chest. "Lady, I could probably buy this whole restaurant." She let out an exaggerated laugh, loud and obnoxious, drawing the attention of nearby guests. "Oh, sure, let me guess. You're a rapper? An athlete? What, some YouTube guy trying to flex?" Miguel paled, his throat tightening as he glanced between Shaq and the woman. He turned to her, his voice low, urgent. "Ma'am, that's Shaquille O'Neal." A beat of silence. The woman blinked, then squinted at Shaq, tilting her head like she was trying to piece something together. And then she laughed again. "Nice try. He's way bigger than this guy." Miguel's face went from nervous to downright horrified. The guests nearby gasped. Even the doorman at the restaurant entrance stiffened. Shaq exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. He had been mistaken for other athletes before. But this was a special kind of ridiculous. Miguel, still trying to salvage the situation, turned to Shaq. "Sir, should I just call security?" Shaq smirked, stretching his arms like he had all the time in the world. "Nah. Let's see how much deeper she wants to dig this hole." The woman's smirk widened as she lifted her phone. The arrogance in her expression was almost comical. "If you won't leave," she said, tilting her head like she had already won, "you'll be removed." Shaq raised an eyebrow, his massive frame still relaxed, arms crossed. Wait, you're calling security on me?" Miguel's jaw practically hit the floor. He had worked valet here for years and had seen plenty of rude guests, but this was a whole new level of crazy. The woman ignored Shaq's question, pressing her phone to her ear. Yes, this is Diane Parker. I'm outside the entrance, and there's a man causing a disturbance. Her eyes flicked toward Shaq dismissively. Yes, I feel unsafe. You need to send someone right away. Shaq let out a deep, slow chuckle, shaking his head. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. A murmur rippled through the small crowd of onlookers who had gathered. Guests waiting for their reservations, staff peeking through the restaurant windows. Everyone was watching. Some had already started recording. Miguel shifted uncomfortably, throwing Shaq an apologetic glance. I'm so sorry, sir. She does this kind of thing all the time. Diane turned sharply. Excuse me, she snapped. What's that supposed to mean? Miguel hesitated, then mumbled. You like to decide who's worthy of valet? Her eyes narrowed. You better watch your tone, or you'll be out of a job. Before Miguel could respond, the restaurant doors swung open. A tall man in an expensive navy blue suit strode out, his face set in irritation. The restaurant manager. What the hell is going on out here? His voice was sharp, commanding immediate attention. Before Shaq or Miguel could speak, Diane turned on the dramatics. This man is harassing me, she blurted out, motioning wildly at Shaq. She even faked a shudder. He's trying to steal a valet spot, and when I told him to leave, he got aggressive. The crowd let out a collective gasp. Some even exchanged incredulous glances. The manager blinked, looking completely baffled. His gaze shifted to Shaq, the 7-foot legend standing there, completely calm. Ma'am, the manager said slowly, rubbing his temple, we don't assign valet spots. It's first come, first served. Diane's lips parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected pushback. Well, maybe if you had better standards, she snapped. You wouldn't just let anyone in. A heavy silence fell over the group. The manager's expression darkened. His lips curled downward. His posture stiffened. The tension was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. His voice dropped, steady but ice cold. Ma'am, do you even know who you're talking to? For the first time since this ridiculous exchange started, Diane's smirk wavered. Shaq reached for the door handle and stepped out of his car, unfolding his towering 7 feet 1 inch frame in one smooth motion. His presence was impossible to ignore. Diane had been smugly looking down at him from her position beside the car. But now she had to crane her neck to meet his eyes. Her confidence flickered. For the first time, she looked unsure. The restaurant manager crossed his arms and sighed heavily. Ma'am, that's Shaquille O'Neal. You know, NBA legend? Diane blinked rapidly, her lips parting as if she'd misheard. No, that's not possible. A couple standing nearby gasped. The man nudged his wife. OMG, that's Shaq! The wife immediately pulled out her phone and started recording. I knew that voice sounded familiar. Babe, we're eating at the same restaurant as Shaq. More murmurs spread through the growing crowd. People whispered excitedly, some pulling out their phones to capture the moment. Diane took an instinctive step back, her arms dropping to her sides. Wait, Her face turned bright red as realization slammed into her like a freight train. A few more guests started snapping pictures, and within seconds the entire atmosphere had shifted. This wasn't just an argument anymore. This was a viral moment in the making. Miguel the valet couldn't hide his grin. He had known all along, but watching Diane's entire world crumble in real time, this was pure gold. Shaq tilted his head slightly, watching the panic creep onto Diane's face. She fumbled for words. Well, I didn't know, she blurted out, as if that somehow excused everything. Shaq let her words hang in the air for a moment before folding his arms. His expression remained unreadable, but his deep, rumbling voice carried weight. And now that you do? Diane swallowed hard, but there was no escaping this moment now. The crowd was watching. The cameras were rolling. And Shaq? He wasn't done yet. The woman scrambles to recover, but it's too late. For the first time since she stepped in front of Shaq's car, Diane's confidence wavered. The moment the manager told her she should have treated Shaq with respect, it was as if the ground beneath her shifted. A few guests standing nearby let out hushed gasps. Someone in the crowd muttered, "She messed with the wrong guy." Diane's face burned red. She turned to Shaq, attempting a nervous chuckle. "Look, this is just a misunderstanding," she said, her voice cracking slightly. Shaq tilted his head, unimpressed. "A misunderstanding?" Diane forced a smile, but her voice betrayed her panic. I just thought you were Shaq cut her off, his deep voice firm. You thought I was… What? Say it. Diane froze. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Miguel, the valet, shook his head in disgust. She does this all the time, sir. Diane spun toward him, her face twisting in anger. Shut up, she snapped. I was just trying to help keep the place classy. A murmur of disapproval rippled through the growing crowd. Shaq let out a slow breath, shaking his head. Lady, you don't even know how deep you just dug yourself. The restaurant manager, arms still crossed, stepped forward. Ma'am, I think you should leave. Diane's eyes widened in shock. Wait, me? She let out a forced, nervous laugh. But I live here. He's just some… The manager's expression hardened. Then you should have treated him with respect. Diane's breath caught in her throat. The weight of those words sank in as the crowd erupted into whispers. The tables had turned, and there was no undoing it now. Diane could feel it, the shift in energy, the way the air had changed around her. Eyes were on her, not just a few, but dozens, watching, whispering, recording. Her stomach churned. The murmurs grew louder, feeding into each other like ripples in a pond. A man in a tailored navy suit, holding a glass of wine, shook his head with amusement. Wow, he said to the woman beside him. She really tried to kick Shaq out. The woman stifled a giggle. I know, right? Of all people. Diane's ears burned. Her gaze darted from face to face, searching for anyone who might be on her side. But all she saw was mockery, judgment, disbelief, and then the final blow. A young woman standing near the entrance held up her phone, streaming live. The screen glowed in the dimming evening light, showing hundreds, no, thousands of viewers. The caption read, Y'all, this lady just tried to block Shaq from parking. You cannot make this up. The chat bubbles rolled in. She has no idea who she's messing with. The way she's about to get humbled. I need popcorn. Hope she likes going viral, LOL. Diane's breath hitched. Her vision blurred. Live. Her pulse skyrocketed as she whipped toward the young woman. Stop recording me, she shrieked, her voice shrill, her hands flying up to shield her face. But it was too late. Laughter rippled through the crowd. More phones went up. Screens glowed. Some people whispered behind their hands, others didn't bother. Shaq, still leaning casually against his car, watched the scene unfold, his face unreadable, calm, unbothered. But there was something in his eyes, something disappointed. He let out a low sigh, shaking his head. Lady, he said, his deep voice cutting through the noise, if you'd just let me park, none of this would have happened. The crowd erupted. One man doubled over, laughing. Bro, she was so confident 5 minutes ago. Another voice chimed in. Now she want to be shy? Yeah, that's crazy. Diane's throat tightened. She wanted to run, to disappear, to vanish into thin air. But she couldn't. She was trapped. The restaurant manager, who had been watching with increasing irritation, finally stepped forward. His voice, now sharper, held no patience. Ma'am, he said, squaring his shoulders, you're making a scene. I'm asking you, one last time. Please leave. Diane's fingers curled into fists. Her mind raced. She couldn't just walk away. Not like this. Not in front of all these people. She crossed her arms, lifted her chin. Oh yeah? She sneered. And what if I don't? For a long moment, Diane stood there motionless, her arms still crossed as if she had one last ounce of power to hold on to. But the weight of the crowd's eyes on her, mocking, judging, recording, was suffocating. The restaurant manager had had enough. He waved toward the valet. Miguel, he said firmly, make sure Mr. O'Neill gets the VIP treatment. Miguel grinned, clearly enjoying this moment. Right away, sir. Shaq smirked, shifting his weight slightly as he looked down at Diane. You mind moving now? For a split second, she didn't budge. Her jaw clenched so tight it looked like she might crack a tooth. Then, without a word, she finally stepped aside. Her face red, her pride shattered. The crowd didn't hold back. A few people clapped. Some laughed under their breath. One man near the entrance whistled. Damn, that was painful to watch. Diane whipped around, her face twisted in embarrassment. Mind your business, she snapped. The man smirked. Oh, I am. This is just the best entertainment I've seen all week. Diane let out a frustrated noise, turned on her heel, and stormed away. Shaq just chuckled, shaking his head. Man, people like that never learn. Miguel quickly guided Shaq's car into the best valet spot, right at the front. The shining rims, the sleek black exterior. It looked like it belonged there. unlike Diane. The moment Shaq stepped out, the energy in the restaurant shifted. The clapping grew louder. Some guests even stood up, giving nods of respect as he walked by. A woman in a designer dress grabbed her husband's arm excitedly. "Shaq's here? Babe, we have to get a picture." Shaq smiled, giving a casual nod to a few fans. A waiter in a crisp white shirt hurried toward him, looking both nervous and excited. "Mr. O'Neill," he greeted, his voice bordering on a stammer. We've got a private table ready for you." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "A private table, huh?" The manager quickly cut in. "Of course. Best seat in the house. We want to make sure your experience here is perfect." Shaq let out a low hum, thinking. He glanced back at the valet area, where Miguel was finishing up, his face still beaming from what just happened. Then just as Shaq was about to follow the waiter to his table, he paused. An idea flickered across his face. "Actually, you know what?" Shaq glanced toward the restaurant's entrance, where Diane stood off to the side, fuming, her arms still crossed like she had any control left in this situation. The energy in the air had shifted completely. Moments ago, she was trying to humiliate him. Now, she was the one being watched, whispered about, and recorded. But Shaq wasn't done yet. He turned to Miguel, the valet who had been caught in the middle of all this. "Hey, man," Shaq said, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "How long you been working here?" Miguel blinked, caught off guard. About 3 years, sir." Shaq nodded, rubbing his chin. "You like it?" Miguel hesitated. "Yeah, it's a good job." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "But it's not where you want to be forever, is it?" Miguel glanced down, shuffling his feet slightly. "Well, I mean, no. I've always dreamed of moving up. Maybe management someday." He chuckled, a little embarrassed. "But you know, that's probably not going to happen." Shaq folded his arms, smirking. "Why not?" Miguel shrugged. "It's just not how things work. People like me don't get those kinds of chances." Shaq's smirk widened. "What if I told you I could change that?" Miguel froze. His eyes flickered with a mix of hope and disbelief. "Wait, what?" Shaq didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Diane, who had been trying to blend into the background, suddenly perked up. "What are you doing?" she asked sharply, stepping forward. Shaq ignored her. With one hand, he held the phone to his ear. With the other, he gestured for Miguel to step closer. "You know who owns this place?" Shaq asked. Miguel nodded slowly. Yeah, it's part of a chain. Some big-time investor owns a few of these locations." Shaq smiled. "Yeah, I know him." Miguel's eyes widened. Diane let out a disbelieving laugh. "Oh, come on. You expect us to believe that you—" Shaq held up a finger, silencing her. The call had just connected. "Yo," he said, his voice casual but commanding. "We need to talk." Miguel's jaw dropped. Diane's face paled. Who exactly was Shaq calling? Shaq puts a plan in motion that shocks everyone. Diane's arms were still crossed tightly over her chest, her gaze sharp and unrelenting. But beneath the confidence she tried to project, there was something else, a flicker of unease. Shaq's words had landed like a heavyweight punch. Miguel, standing to the side, looked dazed. "You're really calling the owner?" His voice was cautious, as if he didn't want to get his hopes up. Shaq gave him a nod, the phone already pressed to his ear. "Yeah, I know him pretty well, and I think he'd love to hear how one of his employees is getting treated out here." Diane scoffed, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "Oh, come on, you expect me to believe you know the owner of this place?" Shaq didn't even acknowledge her. He just waited as the phone rang. Miguel looked like he was holding his breath. His hands were clenched at his sides, like a man standing at the edge of an opportunity so big, he was afraid to take a step forward. Finally, someone picked up. "Hey, what's up, man?" Shaq said casually, as if he were calling a friend. Because he was. Diane's eyes narrowed. Miguel's jaw dropped. Even the valet workers who had been trying to keep their heads down suddenly looked up. The voice on the other end of the call was loud enough that those standing close could hear the response. "Shaq! Long time, brother! What's going on?" Diane took a tiny step back, her fake confidence starting to crack. Shaq didn't waste time. He turned slightly away from her, focusing on Miguel instead. "I'm out front at your restaurant," Shaq explained into the phone. "Your guy Miguel, hardest working man here, has been handling valet for years, but he's way too good for that. So I was thinking—" Miguel held his breath. Diane stiffened, suddenly realizing where this was going. "It's time he gets an upgrade," Shaq finished smoothly. The silence stretched for a beat. Then, the owner's laughter boomed through the speaker. "You serious?" Shaq smirked. "Dead serious." Miguel's breath shuddered out of him. His fingers curled into his palm, as if trying to ground himself. Elf in reality. Diane, meanwhile, looked like she was on the verge of exploding. Her face had gone pale, then red, then pale again. The owner didn't even hesitate. "Well, if Shaq's vouching for you, Miguel, consider it done. Come see me tomorrow morning. We'll get you set up." Miguel's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Shaq clapped him on the back, grinning. "Guess that means you're moving up, big man." Miguel blinked rapidly. I don't even know what to say," Shaq chuckled. "Just say you'll show up to work tomorrow." Miguel nodded so fast he nearly knocked his own hat off. Diane took a shaky step forward. "Wait, you're not actually promoting him, are you?" Her voice had lost its edge. Now it was just full of panic. The woman realizes her mistake, but it's too late. Miguel's hands trembled as he held his phone, his eyes darting to Shaq in disbelief. "This can't be real," he muttered under his breath. But it was. The call screen lit up with the restaurant owner's name. Diane's smirk faded completely. Her confidence, once overflowing, had shrunk into nothingness. She watched Miguel like she was waiting for the punchline. Shaq, on the other hand, stayed completely calm, arms crossed over his chest as he nodded toward Miguel. "Better pick up, man. Opportunities don't wait." Miguel swallowed hard and pressed accept. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was crisp, direct, but oddly warm. "Miguel? This is Mr. Lancaster." Miguel straightened his back. Yes, sir. I just got off the phone with Shaq. He told me you've been working here for years, keeping the place running smoothly." "That true?" Miguel's throat went dry. His mind raced through long shifts, dealing with rude customers, covering for sick coworkers, handling difficult nights when the restaurant was packed. "Yes, sir," he finally said. Diane snorted but didn't dare speak. Mr. Lancaster continued. "Then tell me this. Why are you still parking cars?" Miguel blinked. I guess no one thought I could do more." "Well, I think you can. And if Shaq says you've got what it takes, I believe him." Miguel's knees nearly gave out. He had dreamed of a moment like this, but never imagined it would actually happen. Diane shook her head, stepping forward. You don't actually think he deserves that, do you?" Miguel froze. The words stung, but Shaq's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "And why wouldn't he?" Shaq's tone was calm, but there was an edge underneath it, like he was daring her to say something else. Diane opened her mouth, then shut it. Miguel didn't need to hear more. He turned back to his phone. "Sir, what are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying," Lancaster responded, "that you should come in for a management interview tomorrow morning. We'll see if you're a good fit for something bigger." Miguel's hand gripped his phone tighter. His heart pounded so hard it felt like the whole Valet lot could hear it. I don't know what to say." Shaq clapped him on the back. "Say I'll be there." Miguel took a deep breath. "I'll be there." Across from them, Diane looked completely shell-shocked. Her eyes darted between Shaq and Miguel like she was trying to process what just happened. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. Shaq raised an eyebrow. "What's ridiculous? That a hard-working man is getting the shot he deserves? Or that you got caught being a hater?" The small crowd that had gathered chuckled at that. Diane's face burned red. This whole thing is insane. I was just trying to keep some class in this place." Miguel, for the first time in his life, didn't shrink back. He stood tall. "No, you were trying to tear people down who you thought were beneath you. And look where that got you." Diane gasped. Her lips pressed together, fists clenched at her sides, but she had nothing left to say. Shaq smirked. "Yeah, that's what I thought." With one final glare, Diane spun on her heel and stormed off, humiliated. But for Miguel, his life was just beginning. Shock makes sure Miguel gets the last word. Miguel stood frozen, his phone still in his hand, the reality of what just happened settling in. He was no longer just a valet. He had a future. His heart pounded in his chest, emotions swirling in a mix of excitement, disbelief, and gratitude. He turned to Shaq, eyes wide. "How do I even thank you for this?" Shaq chuckled, shaking his head. "You don't need to thank me, man." His deep voice carried a warmth that made Miguel feel like this wasn't just some random act of kindness. It was a lesson in respect, in fairness, in opportunity. "Just remember this when you're in charge," Shaq added. "When you see someone like you, working hard, trying to make something of themselves, give them a shot. That's how you really pay it forward. Miguel nodded, his throat tightening. He could barely speak. I will. Just then, a murmur rippled through the remaining crowd. Diane, the woman who had started all of this, was trying to slip away unnoticed. She had kept her head down after Shaq shut her down, but now she was edging toward the exit, hoping to disappear before anyone else could call her out. But she wasn't fast enough. A middle-aged man, dressed in a sleek suit, stepped in front of her. He had been watching the whole thing. Next time, he said, his voice calm but firm, maybe judge a little less, huh? Diane's face turned an even deeper shade of red. She didn't respond. She couldn't. There was no excuse. No argument left to make. She had lost, not just her dignity, but the respect of everyone around her. With one last scowl, she turned on her heel and stormed off, her heels clicking against the pavement. No one stopped her. No one even cared. Miguel exhaled a breath he didn't realize he was holding. The energy in the air had shifted. What started as an act of humiliation had turned into justice. He looked at Shaq, a slow smile spreading across his face. I'm really doing this, huh? Shaq grinned, placing a strong hand on Miguel's shoulder. Oh, you're doing more than that. Shaq patted Miguel on the back, eyes filled with confidence. You ready for this? A few weeks later, everything has changed. The restaurant was buzzing with energy in a way it never had before. The Valet lot, once a place of tense encounters and silent judgment, was now welcoming, inclusive, alive. And standing at the front, dressed sharply in a tailored black vest and crisp white button-up, was Miguel. Except now, he wasn't just the valet. He was the assistant manager. As he stood at the VIP section, scanning the lot, his sharp eyes caught a familiar car pulling in. A wide grin spread across his face. Showtime! The sleek black car rolled up smoothly, and before the driver could even step out, Miguel was already there, personally opening the door. Shaq stepped out, towering as always, his presence commanding the attention of everyone nearby. A few gasps, some whispers, even a couple of people pulling out their phones. But Miguel? He just grinned. Welcome back, boss. Shaq raised an eyebrow, amused. Boss? Miguel chuckled, motioning to the perfectly reserved VIP spot behind him. Well, technically, you're the boss's boss. Shaq smirked. Damn right. Miguel tossed him the valet stub, then clapped him on the shoulder. This place has been running like a dream since you last came by, Miguel said, pride evident in his voice. No more issues, no more people thinking they're better than anyone else. Just good food, good service, and respect. Shaq nodded, scanning the restaurant. It felt different. The employees were happier. The energy was lighter. And most importantly, everyone belonged. Let's see if they kept my table open, Shaq said, stepping inside. Inside, the restaurant felt transformed. Employees greeted him with genuine smiles. Customers turned, whispering excitedly. And at the back, in a prime location, was his usual table. Miguel pulled out a chair. Right this way, Mr. O'Neill. Shaq chuckled, sitting down. Man, don't start acting all formal now. Miguel grinned. Hey, gotta act like a boss, right? Shaq leaned back in his chair, watching as the staff moved efficiently, happily, effortlessly. It was a far cry from the tension that had filled the place the last time he was here. He tapped the table. So, Miguel, how's it feel? Miguel exhaled, his smile softening. Like a dream, man, he admitted. I mean, I used to stand outside, parking cars, wondering if this was all I'd ever do. He shook his head, almost in disbelief. But now, I'm making decisions, hiring good people, running things the way they should be run. He glanced at Shaq. And it's all thanks to you. The words hung in the air for a moment. Shaq shook his head. Nah, man, you made this happen. Miguel frowned. Come on, you know that's not true. You stepped in. You stood up for me. If it wasn't for you, Shaq held up a hand, cutting him off. I gave you a push, Shaq said, but you kept going. You put in the work. You made this your own. Miguel sat back, letting the words sink in. Shaq smirked. I don't hand out success, man. I open doors. It's up to you to walk through them. Miguel chuckled, shaking his head. Man, you really do sound like a boss. Shaq grinned. Guess it's contagious. Just then, the door jingled. A few heads turned as someone stepped inside. A woman. Diane. Her presence sent a ripple through the room. Employees exchanged glances. Customers murmured. She looked different. The usual confidence, the superiority, it was gone. Her clothes, while still expensive, were less put together. Her makeup, once perfect, seemed rushed. She hesitated near the entrance, scanning the restaurant like she wasn't sure if she should be there. Miguel's jaw tightened. Shaq? He didn't even look surprised. Miguel leaned toward him. You think she came to cause trouble? Shaq smirked. Nah, look at her. She's already lost. Diane hesitated, her hands gripping her purse tightly. She looked toward Miguel, the man she once sneered at, belittled, dismissed. And for the first time, she looked uncertain. Maybe she wanted to apologize. Maybe she wanted to pretend nothing had happened. But whatever she was thinking, it didn't matter anymore. Shaq turned to Miguel, ignoring her entirely. So, you good? Miguel exhaled slowly, then smiled. Yeah, he said, nodding. I'm good. Miguel looked around his restaurant, the one he now helped run. He met Shaq's gaze and grinned. All thanks to you, man.